Hey everyone, thanks for joining me, and today we'll be looking at another DAC. We'll be looking at Topping's current flagship, the D90 Mark III Sabre. I have this unit on loan from Bezos Audio, so I would like to say thank you to them. So let's start off by taking a look at the device itself. This D90 Mark III has a super solid case, no flex, so a little bit thicker aluminum than on the D70 Pros. And I really do like this slight specularity in the color of this silver. It is also available in black. Pretty simple on the front side. We have a power and select button, an OLED screen, and a rotary encoder with push button. Let's take a look at the settings. On the front of the unit, the only thing we have is one power select button and our rotary encoder, which turns and selects with a press. To get into the main settings menu, we'll want to hold down the select button and then power the unit on at the same time. And keep holding that button for about 5 or 6 seconds. There it is, we can release. And now we're in the main menu. Now you'll see the display kind of pulsing in my video, but that's just the frame rate of my camera. When you look at the display in person, it doesn't pulse, it's a solid color. First we have the auto feature. Right now I have it set to off, but as we press down the encoder, you can switch over. SIG is to power on when the DAC senses the signal. TRG is when it receives a trigger signal from another device, and off. 2 is display, and you can use your encoder to go down and select, or you can use the remote control. And here we can select the brightness level of the display. We have medium, high, auto, which turns the display off after a few seconds, low, and I like medium. On number 3, we can select whether we want this unit as a DAC only or as a preamp and DAC, so if we want the volume controlled or not. I prefer to use it as a DAC only, as I have an analog preamp that I prefer to use. Next is our line outputs. We can choose to have both the XLRs and the RCAs active at the same time, RCAs only or XLR only. Bluetooth on and off, our PCM filters, and we have 7 filters. Our I2S settings, we can have it standard or reversed on the phase, and then some other settings to change the pins depending on what kind of receiver you have. Our output level, I have it set to the more standard 4 volts, but you can also have it set to 5 volts. USB for your input, class 2 or class 1. Sound modes, you have your valve sound, transistor sound, or sound mode off. I did all my testing with sound mode off. Phase, we have normal here, or you can invert your phase, balance. And then if you are using this unit as a preamp, you can select whether you want 1 decibel increments or 0.5 decibel increments. SPDIF mode 1 and 2, Bluetooth clear, save and exit, and finally factory reset. I'll go ahead and save and exit. And we come in back to our standard screen. Now the display is showing optical input and sending the outs via RCAs and XLRs. As for the back side, on the rear from the left, we have our balanced XLR output, our single-ended RCA output, followed by our digital inputs. I2S on HDMI, digital Toslink, USB, digital coaxial, our port for a Bluetooth antenna, and AES EBU on XLR. Followed by our 12-volt triggers, 1 in and 1 out. And finally our IEC inlet with power rocker, once again, a very nice power rocker. As the name D90 Mark III Sabre implies, this DAC uses a pair of Sabre chips, the ES9039S Pro chips. And in my opinion, you definitely get that ESS sound. Now I've been listening to this unit for about a month, and on first arrival, I hooked it up to my system, and for about the first 3 days, I was listening and I was going back and forth comparing it to the Topping D50 Mark III, that DAC also using a pair of ESS chips, those the 9039 Q2Ms. And while I was definitely getting a little more detail out of the D90 versus the D50, I really wasn't hearing 4 times the price. Now I was doing casual listening as I hadn't set aside some critical listening time. And I was doing that casual listening with volumes of around 70 to 75 decibels. Yeah, it was better than the D50, but I wasn't hearing that flagship product. Now a few days passed and I had some people over, we were entertaining, and I cranked the volume up, and suddenly I got it. I haven't had the opportunity to do a review on my speakers yet, but I'll tell you what I'm working with. I have a 3-way design with planar magnetic mids covering 500 Hz to 10K with a ribbon super tweeter covering over 10K. And for the lows, a bass cabinet with a 12-inch woofer in a bass reflex configuration, hitting 30 Hz, 20 in the room. So while my mids and highs are very fast, that 12-inch woofer is a little bit slower than the other 2. It is a lightweight paper cone, so not exactly sluggish, but not at the level of planars or ribbons. And I live in Los Angeles and have my whole life, so I've had the opportunity to make friends with a lot of people in the recording industry, and I've had my share of time inside a recording studio. What the D90 Mark III Sabre does is it turns those bass cabinets into studio monitors. Now if you get a chance to visit a studio, you'll hear the clarity in the speakers, but the one thing that'll stand out to you the most, guaranteed, is going to be how clean and fast the bass hits out of studio monitors. It's pretty impressive how the bass stops on a dime. Now they're not the most musical, but they're definitely the most analytic and accurate for the need in a studio. And I think that also describes the D90 Mark III. Extremely accurate, super clean, very balanced, nothing seems out of place. Vocals are crystal clear and very well defined. The highs are very well extended with a nice amount of shimmer, but they're not piercing or artificially boosted. The background is super dark. When the music stops, it's dead silent. The soundstage, deep and wide, slightly deeper and wider than the D50, about the same as the D70 Pro Sabre, with excellent layering and instrument separation. But again, the highlight of this unit, once you give your speakers a little bit of power, is that bass. Tremendous amount of control, extremely fast. I've never heard my speakers so impactful with bass. I remember watching YouTube reviewers speak about DACs maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and the consensus back then was that the DAC should be one of the last things in your chain that you should upgrade to get a good amount of change in your system. Now, while I personally feel that speakers are still the place that you really want to start with and put the largest chunk of your money, the changes in sound quality that I've heard in these DACs recently is just amazing. Subtle would not be the word that I would use. This is a super fun DAC. It is slightly forward, but not overly forward and in your face. And it is extremely revealing. I did test out a few older MP3 tracks, and those were not a good match with this DAC here. I think this DAC really calls for a higher quality file, but honestly I think if you're spending $900 on a DAC, you're going to be sending it good quality files, at least 16-bit 44.1 FLAC files. With those MP3s, the vocals sounded super crunchy and I got that artificial digital sound. That choppiness between notes just wasn't smooth at all. Now that's not a negative at all on this DAC. The DAC is just relaying the information. It's going to give you so much detail that if you give it a poor file, it's going to give you what you sent it. Now I personally still prefer the D70 Pro Octo because that has a much more laid back feel. I'm up there in my late 40s and this is more of a young person DAC, I think. Now if your budget allows for both, that's a great alternative right there. You have one for those laid back moods and one for a more energetic party kind of vibe. Or if you're just an extremely critical listener and love to hear every single detail in the music, there's nothing wrong with that also. This DAC will give you that, while the D70 Octo is going to be a little more relaxed, not as much detail, but I think a little bit easier on your ears also. The D90 gives you a lot to process. The D70 Pro Octo definitely has a little bit fatter and looser bass, but that's only in comparison to the D90. The D70's bass is still plenty controlled. So yeah, that's what this D90 is about. The D90 is about detail, clarity, and bass control at the top of its list. For most of my listening, I did connect the D90 Mark III Sabre to my Jungsong preamp, then over to my Iota VX PA3 power amp, which is a Class AB power amp. I also listened on the FX Audio L07 and the Doak H7 Pro, which are Class D amps. And between those three, I think I like the sound of the Iota VX the best. The Class D amps were just a little too dry for me, and I do think that this DAC does benefit from a Class AB amplifier that has a little bit of warmth. So in my book, this is a solid recommend and definitely a flagship product. I don't have a sound demo for you guys on this video, but I did add this DAC in the sound demo for a previous video. So if you'd like to listen, that's on my review of the SMSL DO100 Pro. Thanks for watching everybody, and I'll see you on the next one.